Test, test, test. All right, looks like microphone's going. Righty. Got this going. It's a little bit. Boom. 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 There we go. All right, 3 minutes. Hello, how are you?
It's that class I have next door. I play all that music all the time. That might be a good class.
Yeah, they do like music over there.
Sue the Savage Beast.
It sure does. All right, so we got 2 minutes. We're gonna be talking about violence today. I like violence. About violence. So we've moved out of the theory section, so we're done with the actual theory part, which is nice, and now it moves off into different topics. So today, we're moving into violence. So we'll see how many people show up.
I got 3 questions for you, but I know.
Yeah.
One of them was on. Did you change the points on the quizzes?
I don't think I did. I might have
You
been.
probably did, you didn't know it.
Okay, how many points was it?
It's supposed to be 50, but you had 25, but
Okay.
but you only had 25 questions.
Then
instead of 50.
yeah, then the points are off. I needed that. That's just a couple cut button clicks.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I figured, well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I figured you got a lot going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just.
Yeah, that's a calculation thing. So I just went in there and what I did is I whenever I set up the quiz, I need to go in there and tell it to say 2 points.
It's the same as criminal procedures, except the quiz there is worth 25, and that's what I kind of figured you probably.
Yeah, I try to keep most structured the same, so it's because I don't have to think about it, but this one came out a little bit different because this one's a new class. So this is my first time teaching this one.
Let's have an assignment that takes out of the 25 points
Yeah.
on the criminal procedure. But that was the only, the other one was up when the final papers due, but that's the 30th.
Yeah, that's getting fast. I need to get feedback to you guys.
At least that's what I think it's 30th. April 30th.
We got, it's officially 1 o'clock. Let's see if anybody else rolled in. I should be expecting some people to pop in through here. No, that's okay. We'll give it a couple minutes.
Ask you about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm next semester.
Mm-hmm.
You got There's one.
High
The
flex.
High flex.
Yeah, high flex.
So if you take the class, you could do that either or, you could do it from home.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the high flex are gonna be like this, where it's split between in-person and online, but
Yeah.
you can float either or go to
Cause
home.
I'm thinking about doing it kind of online.
Yeah.
But is that like Zoom?
Yeah, yeah, and that's basically what it is, because right now they had it, like this semester, they called it, they had one that was Zoom and one was face-to-face, and so it had two classes.
Yeah.
This way, it's really, they just have that one class, so it generates a lot less work, because what would happen is we'd have the in-person class, then you have the Zoom class added. On our side, we'd have, a Blackboard shell for both, that we have to go in and
Yeah.
tell them to combine. If we don't do it in the right time frame and stuff starts getting popped in there, it deletes it all out, so any submissions are gone. It's like, so there's that, and then you have the scheduling. Oh,
So is something set up through the Blackboard, that iFlex?
yeah, to some degree, to some degree, they set that up in their systems, and it should run basically like what these classes are running. So you want to be here in person, or you want to be here online, just either or. Some have got set up listed as being here, some as in Broken Arrow. I think they've got me as Broken Arrow for one of them. It's going to be changed to here, but I may still go over Broken Arrow some to see if I can start seeing some students there.
Broken Arrow seems like they have a lot of online people there.
They do. That's one that's,
I've never gone over there.
I've not been on their physical campus myself. I've driven by, looks nice, but it's not as popular.
I kind of live about an hour, a little over an hour away, 5 minutes. I thought, well, if I don't have to drive that far, because every day, I'm up here every day.
Yeah, and that's rough if you do want to start doing
So
that.
that's why I'm next, in the fall, I'm thinking, I'm gonna change over to that.
Mhm. Okay, so we need to talk about violence. Because this is the point at which we start moving into chapter 10 and they start moving on to topics rather than theories now. So we'll talk about violence and how it kind of works, and then we'll talk about, well, sociological things related to violence. To begin with, do we view violence favorably or disfavorably? Let's see.
Depends on the setting.
It does.
If it's a war situation, it might be okay, but in the peace, or
We'll say
everyday society, no.
in play,
Or yeah, play like football, sports.
violence in play. Okay, so we've got sports. What kind of sports would we say are violent?
Well, football,
Football.
rugby.
Rugby.
It's kind of the same.
Yeah. What else? Boxing. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
good old
And
boxing,
then MMA or MMA.
Yeah.
or whatever.
mixed martial arts, all that good stuff. Yeah, those are always fun. My favorite boxers by the guy by the name of Butterbean. You ever
Yeah, I
seen him?
remember that.
He looks like a butterbean. It's like, see,
And
just
so
shaped
like
like a butterbean. Big mountain of me. Okay, yeah, and so definite violence in each of these things. There's definitely a some type of positive element, or you could say aspect of violence itself. There are situations where it is called for. This is one of those standpoints that some people might actually disagree with that. That there might be those who'd say that there is never any situation where violence is called for. I want to say that I was kind of perusing the book a little bit, and I think they kind of talk a little bit about that that there's those that have that stance, and well, that's ideal, but also a little unrealistic at times. When we look at it, you can see that there is some positive aspect to it, whether it's competitiveness, the competitive nature of things. Physical ability is another one you often get with a lot of these sports. Is not so much about the fact that you're playing sports, about what you can do. Some of the people who are involved in that do things that are way outside of the range of normal. Like you see someone who can run, big guy moving a big distance real fast is crazy to see. Sort of like watching wrestlers. That'd be another one. It's like wrestling, even though it's kind of dramatized. It's like you see big people doing stuff that you really wouldn't normally see. or people taking huge amounts of physical punishment and still carrying on. That's kind of the positive thing there. We see some elements there.
Would you say that's changing at all? Think about violence in sports, because see, they're trying to get away from that, a lot of stuff, the impacts in football.
Okay.
I think it's gonna go to, there isn't gonna be any violence in sports,
Lessening over time.
you know, over time. There you go.
Question mark. Here's a good example. Ooh. UFC. MMA stuff, Ultimate Fighting Championships, that started up in the early 90s. I actually started watching whenever I was a kid, and when they first started UFC 1. If you look at any of those things now, they still take place. The early ones though were extremely violent. The rules there weren't any. And like here you could literally see if you had the person unconscious on the ground, you could still drop a knee on their head. You know, it's like that's the kind of, you know, just how rough they were, just full on go. But they had to start dialing that back. So it has lessened over time. One of the things that's really interesting there is if you start looking at, and this is just completely off the topic, we'd be thinking about things like hormones and chemicals and its relationship there, because you're going to see that you know, whether it's the birth control that's in the water supply or the number of hormones that your food's exposed to and all that kind of stuff. It's like there's definitely something going on there. But overall, if we're looking at violence in time, it's like we've always been a very violent creature. If you look at what is it, our next closest animals are monkeys, and not monkeys, but primates. What is it, the bonobo monkeys is some of the closest ones that they say are to us. If you look at monkeys, one of the interesting things is how they use violence. Because what will happen is they set themselves up sort of like what we do, just to a smaller degree where there's hierarchies there. And if there's ever any unfairness, they'll become very violent very quick. And it's not uncommon to see monkeys tear each other apart, like literally. And people aren't much different. They really aren't. And so,
You're talking about UFC. Were you ever a big fan of like WWE?
oh yeah,
Into that?
oh yeah, I was a big fan of.
You seem like that kind of guy.
Oh yeah, in the 90s, I was a huge fan. It was I still actually I kind of play around with my wife and my kids every now and again. What is it like Hulk Hogan and stuff like that? You know, just start doing that.
I always like
Yeah.
Macho Man.
Oh yeah, snap into a Slim Jim. There you go. But let's talk about reactions for a minute, since we kind of get some baseline stuff in terms of how people react to it. Reactions. So anytime you're placed into a high stress, violent situation, there's a few general reactions people have. What are they? Let's say you're at the local mall. Let's say you're at the dining court. You're sitting there. Next table over, all of a sudden, you see someone just literally just get laid out, just sitting there. They're minding their own business. Someone walks up and just blah, just drops them. You see them sprawl out across the floor, spill out. What do you do?
Well, they say it's about fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Fight.
either go run away or you stay there and fight, I guess.
Yeah. So those are two big ones. All right, you have that adrenaline kind of thing. Fight, flight. The last one here, one people don't talk about so much, freeze.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you start dealing with this, you start seeing these are the general reactions that people have. You see something, boom, adrenaline kicks in. Are you going aggressive, run away? Cannot compute. You know, it's just like, I don't know what to do here. And so those are our general options here. Usually what you'll find, and the book kind of talks us a little bit, is that some people tend to, they'll have general dispositions that put them towards one way or another. Like people who are really aggressive, we'll see that over and over again. They'll move over here. They'll be more likely to move here than here. There are all kinds of reasons for them. We'll get on that why, but you'll kind of see that. Flight and freeze. Freeze usually happens when you have someone who's not prepared for whatever it is that they're going into, kind of thing. That's one that's just, whether it's a new situation, you don't know what quite to do, or, whether responsibility kind of falls on a particular one person, there's sure that comes up. But the really interesting thing about this,
Let's be
Yeah.
freezes, be it freezing or you're just in disbelief. Yeah, wow.
it's a little bit of both. Sometimes it's the I can't believe this happened. It's like, what the hell do I do? Sometimes it's just, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Right?
Don't react at all.
Yeah, and talk about this. It's like these are hardwired. It's not just like humans. This is all animals. And the book will kind of do this a little bit. It'll tie into like natural stuff a little bit. You'll see it in other areas of it more. But like a good example of this, if you look at animals and predatory behavior, you'll see the same kinds of things. The animal that is hardwired for flight. Think things like predator versus prey. In the presence of a predator, prey will tend to take flight. As they do that, you kick into the predatory wiring of whatever animal it is. And so you get that kind of feedback thing that goes on. You know, anecdotal kind of evidence. I remember a few years back, they had a big story about this lamb had become friends with a lion kind of thing. It was, I don't know, it's religious connotations was what got the attention or what. Basically what it was is this baby lamb was a baby, didn't have this flight instinct yet. And since it was so young, whenever came across a lion, it's like, it didn't know to do this. Since it didn't know to run, the animal didn't know, the lion didn't know, I need to chase this thing down and eat it. And so would play with it. It kind of hurt it some too, but that animal would just freeze and not know what to do. And this thing didn't know to eat it. And so there's a whole bunch of interactions between these things when you're dealing with people in mass, who does what, that kind of thing. But these are your general kinds of things. What ends up happening with people at large is, well, the book will talk about it in terms of, it dives into something, I think they start talking about habits in this book, or maybe it's a different one. But basically it's one of that learned type of thing. The more you find yourself in situations, whatever option you find yourself taking more is the one that you're reinforcing kind of thing. And so whichever one you have that general disposition for, whichever one you use the most is the one you end up with most. Whatever you practice is what you fall back on.
So you think that's more of a learned behavior? It's not
To some degree, there's definitely the biological component of it, but that learned part of it is very, very, very important. It's sort of like whenever you start talking about violence and the possibility of fighting, if you're talking about it in a positive way, usually people say like rising to the occasion. It's like that never happens. You always have people who fall back to their level of training. And so if you're going into one of these things, you don't want to be learning that while you're going into it. And that's usually the big thing I start with when we start talking violence. Is if you're going to be in violent situations, you don't want to learn about it when you're in it, right? Like if you're there, that's really bad. And so from the outset, that's kind of like the one of the first things I'd like to talk about, just because of the fact that see what the book actually says here, where it moves. Violent crime. I got it up. Yeah, it starts talking about violent crimes and stuff like that. So there are positive aspects to it. There are definitely the negative to it. But from that standpoint, if there's ever something that you might ever consider yourself being in, you need to spend some time thinking about it, because naivety and unawareness or lack of training will get you here. That's really bad. It might get you here, right? And ideally, if you have to, you'll be here, but that's.
I think that changes over time.
Yeah.
Like the older you get.
Yeah. The older you
fight,
get, you want to move.
fight.
And that's physical capability, that kind of stuff too. And so, like, if you have to be ready for it, ideally you avoid the whole thing. Book talks about it in terms of cycles and things of that nature. So we'll start getting into that. Main thing is just, yeah, there are positive aspects to it. There are needs for it. And that is part of this as well. Let's see what the book does, because it's going to focus in on the salacious, starting out with people like Dylan Roof, mass murders, and things like that. All right. Gives you some
There's a story with that. Was he the one that did that shooting in that church?
Yeah, he was a church shooter. Was that the black church, if I remember correctly?
South-
Yeah, South Carolina Methodist Episcopal Church. Even spent an hour in the Bible study with the parishioners before he opened fire. 9 people shot and killed, including the pastor. 10th person survived. He said, why? Long hate-filled screed said black on white crime. It was a race thing. Yeah. All right. So here's where they really start getting into expressive versus instrumental violence. So violence can have, at least in this type of conceptualization, expressive and instrumental is the 2 different ways that they classify it in here. Instrumental, well, we'll go with expressive. That's going to be your emotional type. You're trying to basically getting out the violence for the purpose of the violence itself, right? I have this feeling, I'm getting it out, I've expressed it. Instrumental is you're doing something violent for whatever it is, it serves a purpose, right? This one is just for the violence itself, this one has a purpose, right? Here it says, designed to improve the financial and social position of the criminal. So, anger, esteem, maybe, right? Talking like inner city youth, that kind of thing. Yeah, you got in a fight because you had a heated conversation with somebody. Well, it wasn't just that you had a heated conversation, but that person was smack talking for a while, and then so that you started to lose some value. So you went and you made sure that they knew who was who. And so that's kind of the difference between those 2 things. All right, let's see what else they cover in here. Causes of violence. This is where you get in the cycle kind of thing. Differentiate various causes. Okay, well, we can talk about that for a second before it dives into it. What causes violence?
Well, depends on which one you're looking at. If you're talking expressive, it's just your emotions.
Okay.
You don't agree with somebody, but you can't.
Emotions.
Yeah, you can't control your, your anger, basically.
And control.
Yeah. And instrumental is basically a planned thing in a way, because it's like a gang, gang on gang, that's kind of planned. I don't know how you put that exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a pride thing.
Like a cognitive and emotional kind
There
of
you
thing.
go, yeah.
Yeah, you got those things.
Probably more to it than that, so.
What about the crazy? Go with the Dylan Roof thing. You're gonna go into a church and shoot up a whole bunch of people after hanging out with them for a while. Like you got some stuff in there that there's some craziness in there.
Yeah. But I see that as the emotion part,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know, I just don't think anger is something you should be able to control, but if you can't, then that's a craziness. It's an expressive thing. If you can't control your bad control, like you said.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's look at this.
So what did they say about him? Did they say he was
Racism.
stand trial and he went to trial? He
Um,
went to trial yet? I don't think he has.
No, I've not actually looked into that case specifically. They take a long time. Take a look real quick, see if there's any
I'm
news on
kind
it.
of curious, because I'm
Mhm.
almost thinking that they tried him already, but maybe not. Usually you went life or whatever they.
Dylan Roof. We'll
Serving
see.
time, death row, yeah.
Yep, serving time. So he
that
stood
that
trial.
must have been a federal crime because he's in Terre Haute.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the federal prisons.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right.
Oh.
So here's where they start going. So they'll start going into personality traits, socialization, those types of things. And so I've got so personality traits. What do we want to talk about? So what kinds of things do we think are associated with violent personalities? Okay, mental abnormalities, multiple psychomotor, I cannot say that word, psychomotor impairments, seizures, low intelligence, illogical thinking, hallucinations, depression, impulsivity, all of these things here.
Is that like epilepsy?
Yeah. So, young people convicted of murders shown signs of suffering, all of those types of things. So, you look at biological, you'll look at the abnormal psychology kind of stuff. Negative personality traits, we start looking at when we start looking at depression, impulsivity, aggression, all those things. Okay. Here they mention aggressive men have been found to have long history of torturing and killing animals. Animal cruelty has been associated with psychiatric disorders, those kinds of things. And so we have everything from well, let's put it this way, because I don't want to say just deviant or abnormal or something like that. We'll say from
See if they consider those,
oh,
if they consider those mental illnesses. Why are all these people in prison? I mean, that sounds kind of nutty, but
well, that is one of the arguments there for
I
a
guess
lot
it's
of
a
that.
safety issue. You can't let them, run around.
Yeah, and that's where you start getting at is at what points is this sickness and at what points is this still purposeful, still
Yeah.
chosen, that kinds of things. And so you start seeing here is you have the negative personality traits, you have the negative aspects of all of that. But what's another thing here is that obsession with violence, that animal cruelty and those types of things. What do I want to tell you about?
There was some on the news about last night about this guy. I don't know if you saw that on Watch Fox News on 23.
Mm-mm.
There was this guy, he grabbed this dog, he took it and he stomped it to death right in front of the camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's great. That to me, that's nuts.
yeah, and so
But that's animal cruelty, right?
it is, and so is there something that as wrong as that is, what's going on with that person there? Is that
Yeah.
something that's evil, or is it something that's
But have they nailed it down to any of those traits, or is it all of those traits?
honestly what they've done is they just make associations, right? And so as they're doing analyses, they'll see, okay, so as we're looking at those who've been convicted, it's like we're seeing a higher prevalence of all of these types of things. And so as the negative elements there stack up, you start ending up with more of these more negative outcomes.
I always wondered if it wasn't, on schizophrenia.
Well, basically, we start running into is between the normal stuff that causes people to become violent, between the abnormal stuff, which is still really common that causes people to become violent, and then you have the whole physical things. What here it says brain structure, right? It's like it's not just brain structures, it could be structure itself, could be trauma, all those things. Even whenever you get into it, it's like I think early in the semester I might have mentioned traumatic brain injuries. If you literally have a traumatic brain injury, the likelihood that you just automatically become violent is extremely high. They actually have to counsel, or not counsel, but advise emergency responders about that kind of stuff. It's like if you have a traumatic brain injury, that person very likely is just going to be violent just from the outset. No communication, just as a biological baseline.
Plus, there was something that we thought, it was in the test, actually, I don't want to give away anything, but
Yeah.
it was about lead.
Yeah, lead's another one.
Is
So
that a problem?
well, it used to be a big one in the 70s. So we had lead. Yeah, and so that's literally the gasoline change was because of the lead in the air, and it was showing up in blood. And in the areas where it was showing up, you had mental retardation and increased violence.
And lead-based pain, kids are cheap eating them.
Oh, yeah. So there's the environmental aspect of it, the intelligence aspect of it, the socialization aspect of it, all of the personality and the psychological stuff, and then you have the socialization, which is the other part of it. And that's where they start getting into, bumping in the camera.
But you didn't really think about that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, and that's where they start getting into the social stuff. Mm-hmm.
Aspects.
Yeah, and so that's where we start getting into like, we're sort of going into the child abuse and neglect, right? And so they start talking a little bit about a cycle. So it's like, okay, childhood abuse, where does it go from there? Right? It says, why do identify the cycle of violence in which physical abuse, childhood abuse? All right. Parents or caregivers, direct cause of child violence. And at some point, next gen abuser. Right? And so basically, in that cycle, you become violent, you grow up, you're the next abuser kind of thing. So kids who are abused are more likely to be abusers themselves, creating a never-ending cycle. Significance, more likely to be arrested for violent crimes during their life course. So, as a general thing, this is a cycle. But we should probably talk about this right here. Getting better or worse? Question mark. Kind of a framing thing. Do you think that violence in this society is getting better or worse?
I think it's getting worse.
Okay.
But
Work.
the reason being, I can attest to child neglect, because when I was a kid, I was neglected totally. I grew up on my own pretty much.
Mhm.
So I had to learn all this stuff, and if you go the wrong way, you're gonna be in a cycle of violence.
Mhm.
If you don't learn anything, if you don't know right from wrong and all that stuff. But I think it's getting worse as far as, because I think there's a lot more children that are abused, and it has to do with drug addictions and with their parents and things like that. But I think it's getting worse.
Interesting. I have a hard time telling, because it's one of those things that if you think about it in like long enough time scales, So-
You think it's getting better?
I don't know. It's like, I really have a hard time telling. I think it's just kind of somewhere.
The only reason that I think it could be getting better,
Mhm.
and this, I hate to think like this, but the state gets involved with a lot of these kids.
Mhm.
And does that take them out of that cycle of violence?
That's a
Or
good
or
question.
not? That you'll
Yeah.
never know.
Yeah, and it's one of those,
For
it's
years.
really hard to tell.
Right.
But in terms of like
But-
overall framework, kind of the one that kind of gives me some hope, because it is, it's one that's like, as you think about the whether it's the drugs in the society, yes. Think about or like current issues, illegal immigration, human trafficking, all that stuff. It's like, oh, that's definitely worse. That's definitely worse. And the cycles that's gonna be involved with that are gonna be a lot worse. But you think about like in times, like long enough time scales, we're seeing in the last few generations, it's kind of getting better in terms of at least we're starting to deal with it. But if you think about it, this is one that doesn't explain why people go through this and they don't become this. And you start thinking about it, it's like the number of people who've gone through this and ended up they don't choose this path. It's like, well, I'm starting to think that numbers might actually be a little bit better for those who don't.
I think it depends on the person.
That's true. If you
I'm
have that
telling you.
individual agency, there is a big part of it.
Right. If you don't like jail, don't get in
Yeah.
there. So it's what factor keeps you out of that situation or not.
Yeah.
If you could put up with it and you're happy with that, you're gonna be you're gonna be a criminal. If
Oh,
you
yeah.
can't, then you're, like I say, because when I was a kid, I got in trouble a lot.
Oh, yeah, and some of these are just about a
And
certainty.
I just didn't, I didn't like that part of it. I thought, well, what's wrong with me? Why am I doing all this stuff, And I didn't go into that cycle of violence, but I could have
Yeah.
very easily.
Yeah,
So,
and if you look at it in terms of like the environment itself, if you're here, what's the likelihood that you're gonna end up following that path? What's how certain is it that life will try to set people into this path is really, really high. It's like, I could tell you of, personal anecdotes where it's like, okay, you meet a 7-year-old kid who's already having issues with, their elementary school administrative side of things. And, literally you can walk up to the kid, Knocked off. Luckily I had this happen where it was, kids in trouble and sitting outside the principal's office. So you have a conversation with them and say, okay, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I see myself in X, then disconnect again. I see myself at such and such, you know. What was it? It was the oh, I guess, nope, there it is. Okay, good. One of those where it's you're looking at prison. That's where he's gonna be. He's like, oh, I'm gonna be in juvenile hall, and after that, I'm gonna go to prison. Because that's where my uncle, my dad, and my brother are all at. It's like, oh, shit.
That's a big one.
Yeah, and it's like, at that point in time, it's like, oh, yeah. You're kind of stuck there, aren't you? Right? And at this point in time, you're already failing in school. You don't have any support there. You don't have the skills, because someone's there to teach you that, and then everyone there, when they're there, they're alternating between prison and not. Becomes very, very, very
Yeah.
entrenched, that cycle.
But you're right, a lot of it has to do with your support system. If you have if everybody that you know is a criminal, you're probably gonna go along that path, but if none of your family is that way, you know, you're gonna maybe find somebody that, you know, will kind of guide you in the right direction.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And this is kind of getting to the theory stuff, but
So you have that cycle here.
yeah, it's a cycle. You get out of the cycle.
And so they start talking about that child abuse, that childhood neglect can set that cycle off. And then it starts moving into human instinct. This is what we are talking about a minute ago. And so they broke it out this way. They said eros and thanatos. So basically your life force and your death force. And some people seem to have an instinct for life and an instinct for death. That's Freud saying that.
Who said that?
Freud. Yeah. So it's like, possess two opposing instinctual drives: eros, life instinct; thanatos, death instinct. Set towards self-destruction. You can see people who kind of,
So
you can see people who do that too. And it's like, okay, it's like, what principles of life do you want to live by? Are you trying to build something? Okay, you're probably going with eros, that kind of thing. But you'll still see those who are quite literally aimed towards self-destruction, whether it's the substance abuse is a really easy one to start seeing that. Anything where you have like that feedback where it's really, really, really easy to tell, like gambling's another one, right? And so there's here it gives you, can be expressed by violence, sadism as externally or internally, suicide, alcoholism, other self-destructive habits. Aggression is instinctual. Freud saw little hope for its treatment. Yes, it is instinctive. There's an element of aggression that is everywhere.
I agree.
Yeah, to say that it's instinctive, it's like, what is it, Darwin? Natural selection is survival of the fittest. It's not. There's competition, right? Where there's competition, there's aggression because there's only so many resources.
And that's where evolution comes in. It's survival of the fittest.
Yeah, and so if I've got more aggression, that's one way to get the resources kind of thing. You can see that in any number of things. Here it says, biologists and anthropologists speculate instinctual violence promoting traits may be common in human species. And you'll have people who will even go a little bit further. Like I've seen people who've related the levels of violence of people across their geographic location kind of thing. There's elements there to socialization that tend to make some sense, at least at a large scale. For example, if you look at in here, they'll talk about subcultures of violence. In America, it's the southern subculture of violence that as you move towards south, the acceptability of violence increases. If you look across the world, those that are more tropical tend to be a little bit more violent. If you look at places that are colder, you'll see that they tend to be less violent. Like to some degree, that's winter. If you have to be able to survive a winter together to be able to survive, you'll have to learn how to do it together, right? Otherwise you die. The hotter temperatures, the warmer temperatures, food is less of an issue, so you don't have to rely on each other for food. You have to compete against each other for reproduction, that kind of thing. And so there's there's some interesting stuff there. Yeah. And so you got that, because aggression is instinctual, so there's treatments, there we've already talked about that. Unlike other species, humans lack an individually becoming members of their own species. They're able to take lives of their own kind, and or as a result of war or interpersonal conflicts. Yeah, so some animals don't kill their own kind, many do, or like monkeys, I mentioned that already. Monkeys will tear each other apart. They quite literally will. There's studies out there about their senses of right and wrong and ethics. It's really kind of cool. I remember reading one a number of years back where it was about cake. And basically what it was is they were feeding these monkeys, but there's one that they were treating special. And as soon as they started doing that, all the other monkeys, they realized that they did not like that. And that monkey got some hot water. I can't remember if it lived or not, but yeah, it's like that's the kind of stuff that happens. They'll almost get me into a little bit of I think emotions are more of a bad way of counting because we didn't know how to count. Kind of thing. I think that's where they came from. That's me. All right, unlike we're gonna talk about policies and issues of criminal justice, criminology feature suggests not all social sciences are convinced that humans have an instinct for violence. Yeah, so some people believe that not everyone has that instinct for violence. Yeah, I don't know if I'd really want to attack that because they're nonviolent people, I guess.
I want to think of a couple.
Yeah,
Gandhi maybe, and
I still think that chance. Yeah, and that potential for violence is just it's just there.
Gandhi was pretty believed in nonviolence.
Mm-hmm. All right, how do we explain behavior of John terrorist groups? Yeah. So there's a lot of things that can get you where you can be more tolerant towards violence. Exposure, right? And so exposure is one that this country kind of get hit on a lot because we like it, right? We see it everywhere, whether it's on TV, whether it's in commercials, whether it's movies or whatever, home, school. Yes. Here mentions disadvantaged neighborhoods. People of all ages are exposed to violence on a routine basis. Basically, we start talking about whether you're talking home environments of disadvantaged areas, the other issues that come along with that, you get more exposure to violence. And yeah,
But here's something that they don't even list up there.
mm-hmm.
Maybe it's later. It's on video games.
Yeah. So there's a lot that was
I wonder about video games.
yeah, probably back in I think it was in the 90s with was it Tennessee Tech? Was that the one? No, it was Virginia Tech. Yeah. And so that was one of the was it mid-90s, something like that, where Doom, you had a lot of first-person shooters. The video games have only become more and more violent, more and more graphic. And so you do have kids who don't quite get the fact that it's like what you're seeing here should be something that causes some biological reaction, but they've become, well, numb to it. You get exposed to it enough. It's not just the fact that it's more acceptable, so you don't have the same biological responses either, right? Children living in extreme violences may, in time, become sensitive to persistent brutality. They witness and become violent themselves. Basically, it's we can find this in the research in a number of different areas. And mine personally, it's fear of crime stuff. You can find the things that cause fear in different areas because it's going to correlate to this to some degree. If you start getting into your disadvantaged areas, basically your low-level crimes don't cause any fear at all because it's just a fact of life. It's just there all the time. It's like, I'm not so worried about the robbery or the burglaries. Maybe the home invasions, those will worry somebody real bad. Whereas if you go to like a higher socioeconomic neighborhood, a small burglary where someone just ransacked through some stuff that was pretty easily to get into will cause a huge amount of fear. Right, but in that small area, that disadvantaged area, that fear wouldn't be there at all, and so you get some resilience there, but also some downsides to that.
Secondary.
That's got to do with firearms. So they start going into firearms.
I'm a little bit skeptical about that.
Yeah, so this is where they start going off into a little bit of their own biases there. So they bring in the firearm stuff because the firearms they are an element of our society that's a lot different than the rest of the world, and they don't really, they, with the methodologies that are used, they treat us like we're any other country. We're so wildly different that we're really not. And so they start talking about firearms here. So even a single exposure to firearm violence doubles the chances a young person will later on engage in violent behavior. So basically what they're talking about there, that's going to come almost exclusively from cities. They're talking about cities exposed to violence to guns in cities. Because if you get out into the more rural areas, guns are everywhere. It's like you won't have that. Yeah, the children living in areas by extreme violence victims, that's stuff that yeah, so basically it's trying to say that it's dealing with cities.
Basically saying they get desensitized too.
Mhm.
Well,
And
that's what video games are the same thing, they desensitize.
yes, they do. Yes, they do. They desensitize too. And so basically what you start dealing with is it's not just the images, it's not just the weapons. There's something more going on there. There's a lot on the I almost want to say culture, meaning, spirit. I don't know if I want to say spirit. It's not, maybe it is a spirit type of thing, spirit of one's actions. When you say that with the firearms, you key into cities. When keying into cities, usually the possession of those themselves are highly regulated. Usually they're illegally held. So what you end up dealing with is now you've mixed it to the point where this firearms thing is the same thing as the cultural issues that are going to be running in those inner city areas where you're going to find those guns. Right. And so you kind of mix it a little bit. You can see a really strong effect, but it's that cultural element that's really what's driving. It's not just that there are guns around, that the guns are going off, but they're also illegal guns. I'm going to give you an anecdote that's this is one that runs a few different theories or a few different issues if you're dealing with policing is I used to remember the guy's name, but this would have been about the same time as Michael Brown. They had Indianapolis Police Department. I cannot remember the guy's name. I'm going to start to on. Basically, what happened was police get a call that there's a family barbecue taking place in a disadvantaged area. Big family barbecue. Guns fire going off. They show up on the scene and it's a big family. Out of it, the 20-year-old male who's got a couple kids is firing off an AK-47 into the air. It's like you got 50 people there and he's just firing off an AK in the middle of Indianapolis. Yes, police are going to be called. Officer shows up. When the officer does, first officer on scene actually gets out and tries to approach, and at that point in time officer gets shot and killed. It's like that's what happens. It's a hell of a story though. It was in it, officer responds on scene, he's got his gun out. If I remember correctly, what happened was as the officer's approaching, dude's got his rifle. He actually one of his children's mothers runs out and gets between the two of them. And while she's standing there, the suspect proceeded to shoot the officer with his AK-47. Shot the gun so close to the mother that she actually got burned by the muzzle blast. It's like that's the kind of person you're dealing with. That kind of culture, that kind of evil, like that kind of acceptance to violence, that kind of shift in perspective. So much so that even the family who was there, who witnessed some of this stuff. One of the members of the family actually went and said this live, well, the officer could see that he had a gun. He should have known better than to approach the situation. You know, he should have just stayed in his car. And it's like, the hell are you thinking? You've got someone who's just firing off a rifle in a public area around a lot of people. Of course, there's going to be a police officer there. But to those people in that area, what happened? Officer came into a situation that was family barbecue. They didn't want the officer there in the first place, and now somebody's dead as a result. It's the officer's fault, right? And so you got a lot of things that can be going on in terms of whether it's the culture, the perspective, the personality traits, the personality issues, just accepting of violence and what you think is right and wrong from a moral standpoint. top that off, here's where we start getting into the drug abuse stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, substance abuse.
That's what I was wondering about that guy, was he drinking or something?
Yeah, drugs were involved. Drugs were, I can't remember if alcohol was involved, but definitely drugs. Yeah, and so here's what it says. Micro level substance users have a higher rate of violence than non-abusers. Macro level, if you're looking at neighborhoods with drugs and alcohol, you have violence. In fact, if you just look at the geographic relationship to bars, you can see that violence literally acts like a magnet to them, kind of thing. All right, so psychopharmacological relationship. Psychopharmacological.
Between that and your
Yep.
basic psyche and drugs, basically.
Yeah, just basically.
Well, that could even be prescription drugs too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, any of them. Personal drug use includes mercurial irritable temperament increases the likelihood of gun possession and use. Okay, that's interesting. So basically what they start doing is they're trying to tie in alternate relationships, additional relationships. So basically what they're saying there is, okay, with that relationship between drugs and the psychological element, your psychological issues, you're taking drugs, you're also more likely to have an irritable temperament and be in possession of a gun and use it. It's like, yeah, there you go. That makes a lot of sense. These things stack up. All right. Drug ingestions, compulsive behaviors. Yep, you need to start doing stuff to support your habit. Here it mentions systemic link whenever you have to flex muscles to show dominant territory, that kind of stuff. Here's where they go into the firearm availability. The firearm availability alone does not cause violence. It may be a facilitating factor. A petty argument can escalate into a fatal encounter if one party has a gun. Yes, that's true. There is an element here that they are kind of signing into in terms of culture. If you read anything on gangs that dates back to at least the 1960s, before the 70s, you won't see much mention of guns. You'll see a lot of mentioning of things like throwdowns and things like that, where basically somebody's going to get their ass kicked, kind of thing. But you do have that change that happens in those three following decades where they get away from that and move more towards the shootings. Yeah, uniform crime. Okay, 70% of all murders, 40% of all robberies, and 24% of all aggravated assaults involve firearms. Handgun kills 2/3 of all police who die in the line of duty. Presence of firearm in the home also significantly increases the risk of suicide among adolescents, regardless of how carefully they're stored or secured. Basically from that, what you get is a firearm is a very effective tool. Whether it's those aiming for suicide or those who are going to use it for any purpose whatsoever, it's very effective. That being said, it's not super effective, but it is effective. Culture, here's where we start getting into the culture stuff. So Wolfgang and Ferracuti, if I pronounce that correctly, famous concept, subculture of violence. Like I said, here in the United States, they commonly refer to that as Southern subculture of violence. Basically, that as you move to the South, cultures there tend to be more honor bound, more accepting of violence, more finding it more appropriate in different situations, different scenarios. Yeah.
That seems kind of strange to me, but like you said before, it's the hot and the cold.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
The hot and cold is part of it.
Yeah.
And then you have the cultural stuff that comes in, and the cultural stuff, part of it's going to be about resources, part of it's going to be about, if you really go long-term, part of it's going to be about reproduction too. It's going to be about, like if you look at the domestic stuff, the violence stuff, a lot of it has to do with reproduction over centuries. It's one of those things it's sad. It's really sad, but
I kind of wonder if it has something to do with clashes of, well, I hate to say race.
Well, some of it's race, some of it's
just
just
about the South and the slavery and all that stuff.
Well, that one's going to be a little bit of that, a little bit. It's going to be the culture of the people that come from the different areas, and if you think about the time frame that this country was formed, most cultures were very accepting of murder. You still had duels,
That's true.
and even to the point, the beginning part of the last century, it was still quite common to have honor killings. Here, I think in one of the next sections, it actually moves into that one, starts talking about national values. We start talking about people, particularly immigrants coming over here. Honor killing's not uncommon. I mean, if you think about the value of life in other places. I mean, heck, you just go south of the border. The value of life there is very, very little. It doesn't take much to see that.
The religion too. It's like you hear sometimes about honor killings with.
Oh, yeah.
With their fathers that killed their, I don't know if it's their daughter.
Yeah, you'll have you'll have honor killings that are daughters of the most, daughters are the most common. Another one are like their boyfriends and things like that kind of stuff. And it's not something that they look down on. It's something that they view that as required. Police agencies.
You're right, it just shows you how different.
Mhm.
Culture.
But we'll pick up with there next time. And since we are out of time for today, and then next class, what we'll do is we'll sit down and see what all we have left in this semester to do. No.
Was this chapter?
Yep, we're chapter 10. There's only a few more chapters left. I think there's 14 in total. Yeah, there's 14 in total, but this one's almost done. And so the rest of it will go pretty smooth. And with that, we'll call it a day and we'll pick up on Monday, and I'll see you guys next time. Adios.